All right, so hopefully this is working. I apologize for the delay. You can't actually see me, so let's make sure that happens. So I apologize for the delay. Unfortunately, it turns out if we use things from, and Brooks is going to have to get in here to fix that camera. But anyway, so for the moment, I'm going to throw back to the screen. But some of the devices that we use for the consensus, unfortunately, they were working on Friday, and we didn't touch anything. And now they are no longer working. And so we had to figure out why they were no longer working. Brooks is back. I'll take care of the pouring of it. Brooks, can you zoom that camera out a little bit and turn the ISO down? Because that's what I currently look like. Right here. All right, so Brooks is fixing the camera. And once he does so, that's good. And then if you just want to, that's probably fine. Thanks. All right, so hopefully I'm back to not looking like I'm magenta. Brooks has given me a beer. It is from Treehouse out of Massachusetts. It's called Single Shot, and it says it's a coffee milk stout. How old is said coffee milk stout, Brooks?
About a month and a half. Brazil.
It's
Brazilian coffee.
Oh, it's a month and a half old, and it's made with Brazilian coffee. Not Brazil is not a unit of time. 6.4% ABV, pretty light on the stouts here.
They do very good on the milk stouts.
That has nothing to do with the fact that Brooks just said they do very good on their milk stouts. He's talking about Treehouse, but it has nothing to do with how light this beer is.
I figured you didn't get drunk on camera.
Do you have any Sudafed? We can repeat Friday.
I do if you'd like some.
It pours like it's a lot thicker than 6.4%. Or because the ABVs on beers aren't exactly 100%, and sometimes they don't even test them at all. Do you want some of this, Isaac? Are you still on Sudafed?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Your concern is overwhelming.
It's not bad. How many hours did people wait in line to get this beer?
2 minutes.
Okay. So now that's out of the way. So here's the consensus. A few things as I get started. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the process, every year since Half-Wheels has been started, we have done this project called the Consensus. And so it came about because I had this idea as we were planning on Half-Wheel in 2011. Well, what were to happen if we were to take all of the lists that were published from all of the various magazines and blogs and radio shows and put them together? Would there be some similarities and would there be some differences? And what could we learn from the data? And we learned quite a few things from the data over the years. And at the time, I would say there was a big disconnect between the blogs and the magazines. There were certain brands that got a lot of play on the blogosphere, and there were certain brands that got a lot of play on the magazines. Sometimes oftentimes they weren't the same brands, and oftentimes you would see the magazine results and you would look at them as a consumer and go, well, this isn't what people are actually talking about in the cigar world. These aren't the cigars of 2000 fill in the blank. And so the consensus came about to see if we could learn anything from the data and if we could see if there was any similarity between the two mediums and where radio and YouTube sort of fell in. I would say at this point the consensus has changed a bit because the magazine's list in general have leaned more towards modern cigars. There was a time in which you would open up a top 25 list from Cigar Aficionado or Cigar Snob or Cigar Journal and look at it and go, half these cigars, if not 2/3 of these cigars are old cigars that have been on the market for a few years now, and why are we talking about them now? That's changed quite a bit on all three of those accounts and some of the other magazines as well. And the landscape of cigar media has changed quite a bit. It's a lot smaller. There are less blogs, and there are certainly less new blogs. There actually probably been a percentage-wise a bigger increase in magazines over the last 5 or 6 years than there have been in overall number of blogs. In that the magazines have actually increased the amount of magazines and the blogs have decreased the amount of blogs that are out there. And then we have YouTube as a new medium, and I talked about this extensively last year about trying to add YouTubers and cigar YouTubers into the consensus, and certainly made some effort there. So we take all the data, we put it into a spreadsheet, and then we see what happens with the data. We combine all the different vitolas and we give them points. So the top cigar in any list will get 25 points, and then the second one will get 24, and so on and so forth. We only award up to 25 points. I don't think at this point anyone is putting out a 30-point list, but there certainly are some lists where there's only top 5 or top 10. There's like top 13 lists somehow. There's lists with ties and those sorts of things. So I try to break them, and you can read more about that data here. I don't think you want to listen to me try to explain this on camera. A couple disclaimers before I start with the results. Number one, these results are just what happens with the data. They aren't my top 25 lists, and I certainly don't agree with most of them. They aren't Half-Wheel's top 25 list, and our number one is not on this list. And so this is representative of cigar media as a whole. Half-Wheel is sort of the curator of the list, but we are not it's not our list. On a similar note, this isn't like the best list out there as far as I'm concerned. The best list is probably still Half-Wheel's list. It certainly is got the most data amongst any list, but it's important to note that it's not like voting for an all-star game or a Hall of Fame ballot where we send out 200 cigars to all the different lists that are on here and ask them to give us our opinions or give us their opinions about them and rank them. So a lot of the cigars that are on here are only on one or two people's lists. I would venture to guess that probably half of the cigar lists that are on here didn't even rate the number one cigar of the year or the number two cigar of the year. Maybe they did. I really haven't checked that. But it's not as simple as saying, okay, this is definitively the best cigar of the year. If you want to look at it, this might be the most awarded cigar of the year. But even that's somewhat subject to interpretation depending on how you look at it. And finally, you'll hear me at various points try to explain why certain cigars made the list and why they didn't make the list. And the reality is they made the list because multiple people or publications put them on their top list. It's not because the cigars are necessarily better or worse or whatever. I'm certainly going to talk about some of the things that I've noticed over the years of doing this about how cigars make the list and what manufacturers can do to try to increase their chances. And there are times in which I think cigars either placed on this list and could have placed higher if they came out earlier in the year, for example. And so you'll hear me talk about things that seem completely unrelated to how good the cigars are. And that's because I don't necessarily think that the majority of the lists that are on here are indicative of what people actually think to be the top cigars of any given year. There's a lot of parameters and rules, and we have them here at Half-Wheel about which cigars make it and which cigars don't. And I think a lot of people, particularly the individual bloggers who are putting together a singular list by themselves and just sort of sitting there with a open Word document and moving things around, I think they spend a lot of time, and I know this from experience because this is what I used to do before I went to Half-Wheel, and we have this, very thought out system with numbers and ways to prevent that from happening. But I used to sit there and go, okay, well, should I really have two Taiwahes in my top six, or maybe move this one around? You sort of get your top cigar, maybe your top two cigars, and then you work with what you think should be in the top 10. And it's a lot different when you're operating compared to some of the bigger publications where it's based off of data that comes in from multiple people and you don't have that ability to move things around. And so with all of that, I think it's time to get started with the list. So that's the consensus. I'm going to have a sip of beer. Oh, one last thing. If you want to leave a comment or a question, Patrick Legreed is monitoring said comments and questions, and he certainly will get that information to me. And I'm sure my dad will chime in at some time because that's what he normally does during these things. All right, number 25. It is the Hoya Silver from Hoya de Nicaragua. It was made at Fábrica de Tabacos Hoya de Nicaragua S.A. The Hoya Silver is a new cigar for 2018. It got overshadowed by the Hoya de Nicaragua Cinco Décadas, which is the company's cigar that they made for the 50th anniversary of Hoya de Nicaragua. The Hoya Silver follows up the red and the black as sort of the more affordable modern Hoya lines. I'm sure that we will see some additional ones from Hoya de Nicaragua at some point in the future. It's another strong cigar, another strong showing from a company that's related to Drew Estate, which has been a common theme of the consensus over the years. For those wondering, this cigar uses an Ecuadorian Oscuro wrapper over, a Mexican binder and Nicaraguan fillers, and it's one of the more affordable cigars. All Vitol is priced under $8, which is, not always the case with some cigars. And we're going to go ahead and move on to number 24, which also comes from the Hoya de Nicaragua factory, although not from one of the brands that I think the company is more known from working with. It is, in fact, the Villiger La Vencedora. And this cigar came out earlier this year. It's one of the two sort of newer Villiger lines. You're seeing some new packaging from them. I would point out that Villiger, which is a European company, has a lot of cigars that are out in Europe that we don't see here in the U.S. But La Vencedora was sort of a big release for the U.S. They made a big deal out of it. They certainly spent some money with advertising and things like that, which I'm sure people will leave in the comment sections about how that's all that matters for these lists. But like I said, it's also made at Hoyt, Nicaragua, and it's a Nicaraguan Puro with a Habano Oscuro wrapper. And one of the interesting things about this line is that it came out earlier this year in 3 sizes, and then they actually went back and added a 4 size at the IPCPR convention trade show in July, which is kind of a weird thing. Doesn't always happen, but certainly a strong showing for Villiger. They have been doing better on this list, and apparently the word Vencedora didn't make it into that slide. So number 23 is the Perez Carrillo Encore from EP Carrillo. This is a cigar that's been in the works for many years. We've known about it for many years, but it finally came out earlier this year. It was notable for ending up as the #1 cigar of the year by Cigar Aficionado, which is certainly the biggest of the list. And it's a Nicaraguan Puro from Ernesto Perez Carrillo. While it is entirely made of Nicaraguan tobacco, it is in fact made in the Dominican Republic at his Tabacalera La Alianza Eseada factory. EPC is not a brand that has done particularly well on the consensus since really the first year, and I think that that's got something to do with both I think it's fair to say the quality of cigars. I remember, I think if you were around smoking cigars and smoking EP Carrillo cigars in 2010, 2011, 2012, you will know how good those cigars were, and they were, they were some of the best on the market. I still remember the Short Run 2010. It was a fantastic cigar, one of my favorite cigars to this date. And then it seems like the company kind of fell off the path a little bit. Certainly the Crown Head stuff still seemed like it was good, but a lot of the EPC stuff just seemed kind of lost. There were certainly some notable examples like E-Stunner of kind of head-scratching ones. But the company's last year made a decision. They rebranded themselves. They are not rebranded, but they revamped the portfolio. They had that infamous triangle of brands with a whole bunch of brands. They got rid of some stuff, and they didn't really leave. I think there's only 1 or 2 brands that really were left untouched in terms of either packaging or blending or sizes or pricing. And the Perez Carrillo Encore is part of sort of what they consider to be their flagship brands, along with La Historia. That's why it wears the Perez Carrillo label. And obviously, after the Cigar Aficionado rating, certainly I think the cigar is getting a lot more looks. I don't want to say that it flew under the radar, but I don't think prior to the CA #1 cigar of the year, it certainly didn't seem like this was a cigar that people were talking about. It ended up showing up on a couple lists. It's always interesting. I didn't specifically look at it yet to see how many of those lists it made it on that were published before CA's #1 cigar of the year. But like I said, it was only a couple of lists, and Cigar Aficionado with the big 25 points as far as the consensus is concerned really helped out that cigar. So number 22. It's the T, and that is not the right factory, by Caldwell Cigar Company and Room 101. And despite the fact that says Tabacalera William Ventura, the cigar is in fact made at AJ Fernandez. And I'm not sure why that ended up there, because I'm looking at the actual consensus post, and it's correct on there, and most of the information was just copied and pasted. But anyway, so the T, which came out in 2017. It's a Nicaraguan Puro. It is made, like I said, at AJ Fernandez's main factory in Esteli. It is described as a collaboration between Caldwell Cigar Company, Room 101, and AJ Fernandez. As I've talked about in the past, or as I talked about on Friday, I'm not really sure what to do about collaborations. I understand that all 3 people's names are on the cigar, but AJ makes cigars for a lot of people. I don't consider what he does to be with Southern Draw a collaboration between AJ and Robert Holt. And for that matter, Caldwell distributes Room 101, so pretty much everything that Room 101 does is in some way in conjunction with Caldwell. But whatever the case might be in terms of whether or not they are collaborating, the T ends up here. There is a Connecticut version that came out earlier this year, which I think got like 1 or 2 total collective votes, but it did not end up on the consensus top 25. This cigar is, I don't know if I mentioned this, is a Nicaraguan Puro. And if you were wondering about that particular band, because you may have not seen that one, there's a special size of the T, the short Churchill that came with this band. The rest of them come with a different one, and that happens to be the stock photo or the photo that we pulled for this. So, number 21 is the Mi Querida from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. It is made at Nicaraguan American Cigars SA. For those of you that are longtime fans of the Consensus, you will note that this cigar has been on here before. It is, in fact, the third consecutive year that it has ended up on the Consensus, and that means that it is only the third cigar that's ever done this, joining Steve Saka's other cigar most recently that did it. And my mind now draws blank. I will come back to what Steve Saka cigar is. The other cigar was the non-Saka cigar that's done this is the Crown Heads. Headley Grange was on here for 3 years in a row. But Mi Querida is back on the list. Of note, I think that Saka certainly has added more sizes. The size that you see up on the screen right now is, in fact, I believe the newest size. It is a firecracker size, which is an exclusive for Two Guys Smoke Shop, and actually was on our list, as well as at least one other person's list. But this sort of got on here because it managed to make an appearance on a half dozen or so people's top 25 list, and that's enough points to get it sort of into the top 25 of the Consensus, but probably not enough to get it up here. But anytime that you're able to place on the Consensus multiple years in a row, is a good sign. It's very rare. I think there are only 2 cigars that have done it on this year's list, but to show up 3 years in a row, as I mentioned last year, it really speaks volume to not only the quality of the cigars that you're putting out, but the fact that you're able to keep the line in front of media's faces, which is pretty challenging considering that there are always new cigars coming out and we are always smoking new cigars. So the number 21 is the Mi Querida. And the number 20 cigar for the Consensus is the Espinosa Las Seis Provincias, which made it onto Half-Wheel's packaging list because of the infamous swing box, or the famous swing box. And one interesting thing to note here is that it is a Espinosa cigar, and it is in fact not made at Lozona Cigar Factory. Espinosa announced, I believe about a year ago, that they were moving, or a little over a year ago now, they were moving production from the La Zona factory where their cigars have been made previously into AJ's factory, but not AJ's main factory, his San Lotano factory, which he in fact bought from somebody else, from the Olivas family. And they were doing that so that the La Zona factory could have more production capabilities. Some of the new Espinosa products have come out of La Zona despite this, but this is, I believe, kind of the first all-new brand, or I might not be entirely correct about that, but certainly one of the first all-new brands to come from there. Most of the stuff that's now there is like 601 and Espinosa Habano and things that were already at La Zona and then just moved over. But a notable cigar nonetheless, and certainly one of the more pricier cigars on the list, and also one of the nicer packaged cigars on the list. And for those wondering, it's $16.50 a cigar for that LHB. But if you've ever seen the swing box, you will know that it is more than worth it. So moving on to number 19. It's another cigar from an AJ Fernandez factory, although this time it's from Abdel and it's from his main factory in Esteli. It is the Bellas Artes Maduro. This is a new cigar for this year, and it uses a Brazilian Modafina wrapper over a Mexican Sandrace binder, which is, as Brooks Whittington noted the other day during Half-Wheel's Top 25 show, is a pretty rare combination. We don't see that often, and underneath that is a combination of Nicaraguan fillers from Esteli. The cigar, like I said, debuted at this year's trade show, priced right around $10. There's, I believe, one size that's at $11, and it starts, I think, at $8.80. A very good cigar, finished on our top 25 list, certainly a cigar that I enjoyed. I think that Half-Wheel certainly acknowledged that Abdel's factory in particular, but also the brand, had a very good 2018 in terms of the quality of cigars that it was putting out, and it certainly got recognized here in the Consensus. Abdel was the factory of the year last year in terms of getting the most amount of points on the Consensus, but that was really due to the fact of all of his client brands. Abdel's own brand, if I recall correctly, finished outside the top 20 in terms of generating points, but brands like Southern Draw, Nicholas Molino's Foundation Cigar Company, Nomad Cigar Company, and others helped Abdel get enough points and put him at the top of that list. This year, it seemed like, as much as he was working with Altadas in general and others, it seemed like the 2 new cigars that came out for AJ Fernandez this year, they were really good, which wasn't always the case. A lot of times you would smoke cigars, and I certainly would sign up for this statement. I would smoke cigars and would oftentimes think that AJ's best blends weren't going to AJ himself. But that seems to have changed, and I think it's a good trajectory for the company, and certainly cigar media collectively has recognized that in 2018. So I'm going to have another sip of beer. I check the comments or the Patrick text messages, who just says that he sees and hears me. Interestingly, stouts, they change when they warm up. This one's getting less sweet, which I would not have expected. All right, I hope that sounded good for the ASMR fans. So, moving on to number 18. It is, in fact, another cigar from AJ Fernandez or from his factory. But this time it is the Tabernacle Havana Seed CT number 142 from Foundation Cigar Company, which is once again cut off on this slideshow. If we're taking notes about things to improve next year at Halfwheel, it's definitely making sure these slideshows are looked at font-wise. So, great. Patrick says there's stuff coming. So, the Foundation. So this is a cigar that I think really speaks to there are ways to get on this list and there are ways to hurt yourself on this list. And I think in this case, Foundation, certainly the consensus is not the priority for anyone except Halfwheel in this week of the year. But for any cigar manufacturer, you're not putting out cigars to make it on the consensus. But Foundation released these after Thanksgiving, which meant that it didn't show up on many people's lists because most people haven't reviewed this cigar yet. We at Halfwheel haven't reviewed it yet. I don't even think it's scheduled at the moment to be reviewed. We have some here to review. But that meant that this cigar, which I think probably could have done very well had it, in fact, been released, say, in September or October or even early November, doesn't do well on this particular list. I mean, it makes the top 25, but from someone that won last year with the Wise Man Maduro, Nicholas Melillo certainly could have placed this cigar in the top 10. I haven't actually smoked it yet, but given the very limited reviews that seem to have happened of it and the sort of popularity, hype, whatever you want to call it, surrounding Foundation, and anytime Nicholas does anything with tobaccos from Connecticut, it certainly generates a lot of buzz and interest. It was certainly one of the more talked about cigars at the trade show, but it only ends up at number 18, which I think would be less than where it would have shown up in September. Once again, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year if it ends up back on the consensus for 2019. It's always a bit tougher when the cigars get released late in the year before to make it onto next year's list because it means that there's a lot more competition and because a lot of time has gone by. But I think in this case, it probably will show up on quite a few people's lists because most people just haven't smoked it yet. And there's certainly some other cigars that didn't make this list, namely the Liga Privada number 10, or Liga Privada 10 and Rosario and H99 were like, I think people maybe, if you were lucky, you got a sample at the trade show, a sample. But, I mean, given how they're releasing that cigar, I can't imagine that very many people have smoked it, and as such, I can't imagine that very many people have reviewed it yet, but we shall see. I'll talk more about the interestingness with Liga Privada later. Number 17 is another cigar where I think we can have a good conversation about how to make the consensus, is the M. Bombay Classic Torpedo. From Bombay Tobacco. It is made at Tabacos de Costa Rica. Uses an Ecuadorian Habano wrapper over an Ecuadorian binder, and it has a Dominican, Nicaraguan, and Peruvian blend of fillers. So, this is a cigar that showed up at... Sorry. Trying to not clip the microphone as much as I was. All right, let's see if that's better, Patrick. So, this is a cigar that showed up pretty early in the year, and it was only released in samplers. And what's interesting about it is that when you release a cigar only in samplers, that's generally a pretty good way to get your cigar not reviewed because it's very cost prohibitive for people to buy samplers. For example, this was a candidate this year for our top 25 cigar of the year. It didn't make the list, but I believe M. Bombay sent the cigars originally. They sent maybe a 5-pack or something, and we reviewed the cigars based off that. But then we had to buy 3 more for the rest of the site to smoke to consider it for the top 25. That then meant that we had to buy 3 samplers at whatever they were, $45, $50. only to really need the 3 cigars out of them. And I imagine for many other cigar publications, that's probably it's $150 to smoke 3 cigars, which isn't really a great use of money unless you're reviewing a cents per reel, I suppose. And so that's usually speaking not a great way to have your cigar review. Now, I think what happened here is just based off of our experience with M. Bombay and the amount of times this cigar has been reviewed this year. My guess is that M. Bombay sent this cigar out to cigar media. But then what's interesting about it here, and I have to look on my spreadsheet, is that M. Bombay had another new cigar in the MQBA line, which was their main release at the trade show, and I think, if I'm being quite honest, probably a more interesting cigar. And it actually only made this list, or it only got top 25 votes from 2 of the lists that are on here. And so what that would lead me to believe, and I think I can once again speak, that's interesting. I think I can once again speak to this in a first-hand manner. I don't believe that we were sent any MQBAs from M. Bombay. And so I would imagine that some others probably weren't as well. And it would be interesting to know, not that the M. Bombay Classic Torpedo is a bad cigar. It is, in fact, a very good cigar. I smoked it. I enjoyed it. It was obviously considered for our top 25 list, which is not something that's easy to do. But it would have been interesting to know what would have happened had the MQBA went out, because it seems like the M. Bombay Classic Torpedo, which, once again, if cigar media actually had to buy that cigar each and every time, I imagine there would be far less reviews than what actually happened, whereas the opposite situation happens with MQBA, and it doesn't make the list, and it is what it is. It was close to making the list, but it didn't make it. It ranked highly on both of the lists that it ended up on, but it only ended up on 2, and I think that even if 2 publications this year gave you number 1 cigar of the year, I don't think that you would have had enough points to actually qualify in the top 25. I guess I can check that really quick. No, you would have. So interestingly enough, you would have qualified for the top 25 if you got 2 first-place votes and only 2 first-place votes. But a cigar that would have done that would have gotten 22nd, 23rd place, it looks like. This spreadsheet is very far away from me, or further than my eyes can probably handle. Anyway, so that's number 17. Number 16 is somewhat of a surprise, and I'm curious to know kind of how it ended up on here. I have some ideas, but it is the Liga Privada T52 from Drew Estate. If you had to pick a Liga Privada line this year that got talked about the most, T52 would probably be the last one that you would have picked. There were new sizes. Drew Estate added 3 new sizes to both the Liga Privada number 9 and to the Liga Privada T52 lines, but number 9 always seems to sort of get more play than T52, and they also added 2 entirely new lines, an H99 and 10 Anniversario. Now, as I noted earlier, neither one of those cigars were widely available to both the public and media, and as such, we haven't seen a ton of reviews for H99 or 10 Anniversario, and I'm curious to kind of know if we ever will, or if they're just going to slowly trickle out. For those that are unfamiliar with the process, Drew Estate right now is raffling off monthly allocations to receive boxes of 10 Anniversario and H99. They're 2 new Liga Privada lines. I don't have all the details in front of me, but it's a very small number of boxes. I think it's like a total of 40 boxes a month or something. Maybe it's a little bit more. It's less than 100 a month between all the lines. They're only picking a handful of retailers for each one, and it's a very confusing process. And I imagine, particularly with 10 Anniversario, that retailers are going to get a few boxes and then they're going to get sold, and there's a good chance, at least as far as we can tell with how Drew Estate's described this process, that they will never see any more allocation after that, and as such, it's extremely challenging to buy those boxes. Now, as far as T52 is concerned, the new Corona Viva size helped quite a bit, but there were also like a vote for the T52 Parejo, which is the original 6x52 size that came out in 2009. So, yeah, not entirely sure why 52 is on here. For those wondering, number 9 did not make the list, but certainly one of the more popular lines of the last decade, and I think the first time that it's actually made the consensus. We've only been doing this since 2012, or since 2011, I guess, with the 2011 list. So I'm not entirely sure but I'm not 100% positive, but I do believe it's the first time that one of Drew State's stronger lines has made, both in terms of sales and in terms of strength, has just made the list. Now for a line that is entirely new and not terribly surprising to make the list, it is Moon Garden from Warped. It is a single size line, only offered in the Lancero that you can see, like, I don't know, a quarter of, less than a quarter of on the screen. It's made at TAPSA, the Aganorsa Associated Factory in Esteli. It's Nicaraguan Puro with a Corojo 99 and wrapper, and Corojo 99 and Criollo 98 fillers, and the blend. So, it's $15. It was at the trade show, and it is in fact limited. One of the few limited edition cigars that made it on here. Limited to 650 boxes of 10 cigars. The reason why I mention it being limited is because there are some people who just won't review limited cigars. There are some people that will review limited cigars but won't put them in their top 25. I've mentioned my thoughts on this before, but to each their own, I suppose, the list. But I do mention, when you see the actual consensus, we do mention when cigars are limited, because it is something that's interesting to pay attention to. I would say it's certainly harder for a limited edition cigar to make the list than it is for a regular production cigar. Speaking of a regular production cigar and another single size line to make the list, it's number 14. It is the Aladino Corojo Reserva from JRE Tobacco Company. And so this is sort of a signature release for JRE. It's a Honduran Corojo Puro made entirely of Corojo that's grown at their farm outside of Don Lee. And it's old school. It's trying to go back to Justo and Julio Oroa's roots, back with the days of Camacho, when the Oroa family still owned the brand. And yeah, it's an old school Honduran Corojo. It does remind me of what it used to be. I'd still rather smoke the Maduro that they put out last year, or sort of put out last year, and put out in more quantity this year. But the Corojo Reserve is a very good cigar. It's interesting that this one made it, and the Aladino Maduro basically didn't get any. I mean, there were a handful, maybe less than a handful, a few votes for the Aladino Maduro, but certainly the more liked of the two blends was the Aladino Corojo Reserva, which came out once again at the trade show, and it's a single size line, priced at $12. I don't have the dimensions right in front of me for the cigar, so I don't want to try to make them up, but I'm gonna have some beer. And we are running at a much more reasonable time. It looks like we're going to save questions for the end. All right. If we're going to do that, I'm going to have some more beer. Some other fun facts. Number 18, which was the Tabernacle, the Havana Seed, Connecticut, number 142, finished in 18th. Interestingly enough, it's the second year that Foundation has had a cigar at the 18th place in the consensus. Last year it was the Highclere Castle. And what's even more surprising is that Villiger, with the La Vencedora, which was number 24, they actually also finished number 24 last year, which is sort of a weird coincidence. I think those are the only fun facts I have on my notes here, but I'll try to recap them. I will go through the top 14, since we're basically at the halfway mark, really quick, or the bottom, the 14 through 25, not the bottom 14. So I'll do that very quickly so that you can, for those of you that may have joined late, can see this. So I think that if I right-click, sorry, maybe I should have done this process before, or maybe we could have just done this in backwards. So here we go. So number 25 was the Hoya de Nicaragua Silver. Number 24 was the Villiger La, which is the La Vencedora, which I just mentioned. Number 23 was the Perez Carrillo Encore from Ernesto Perez Carrillo Jr. Number 22 was the T from Caldwell Cigar Company and Room 101. And despite what it says on there, it's made at A.J. Fernandez's factory in Esteli, not at Tabacalera William Ventura. Number 21 is the Mi Querida from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. For those of you that were wondering what that other cigar was that I stumbled over, it was Sober Mesa, obviously, Steve Saka's debut line. So Mi Querida made it onto this list for the third consecutive year. There's only been 3 cigars that have done that prior, or have done that at all. This one, Sober Mesa from Steve Saka, made it onto its third list last year, and then Crown Heads Headley Grange made it onto 3 consecutive lists. Number 20 is the Espinosa, or was the Espinosa Las Six Provincias, Seis Provincias. Number 19 was the Bellas Artes Maduro from A.J. Fernandez. Number 18 was the Tabernacle Havana Seed. Number 142, Connecticut, number 142, from Foundation Cigar Company. Number 17 was the M. Bombay Classic Torpedo. And interestingly, it was just the Classic Torpedo, none of the other Classic, or if there are any. I think there are. I don't know. Anyway, that was the only one that made it on here, the only Vitola that was mentioned as far as the Classic was concerned. Number 16 was the Liga Privada T52. Number 15 was Warp's Moon Garden. Number 14 was the Aladino Corojo Reserva, and that means it's time to unveil number 13, and that is the Ramon Aliones by A.J. Fernandez. So, as you can see, there's Ramon Aliones by A.J. Fernandez is up on here. I guess it's on the consensus is when or on the actual text document of the consensus, I made some delineations here. So the Ramon Aliones brand in the U.S., General Cigar Company has the trademarks for it. They really have not done much with the brand, historically speaking, in the U.S., and so they decided to let Abdel Fernandez's company not only make cigars, but also basically run the brand. And I'm sure that General Cigar Company gets a residual on it, and they still own the actual brand. But it gave A.J. Fernandez the opportunity to make cigars for a historical Cuban label, which there aren't many of them, or there aren't many active Cuban labels. There's only 32 of them, or 33, depending on how you want to look at it. And some of them, like Vigueros, for example, I don't think anyone really cares too much about making. In the U.S., Ramon Aliones is certainly a much different story. So A.J. Fernandez not only makes the cigars, they also distribute the cigars. General Cigar Company owns the trademark. As far as the cigar is concerned, it has got an Ecuadorian Habano Oscuro wrapper over a Nicaraguan Corojo 99 binder and a variety of Nicaraguan fillers, including some Pueblo Nuevo tobacco, which is not widely used in Nicaragua, certainly not as well known as the main growing regions of the country. So this cigar came out earlier this year. I was super impressed with it. Really enjoyed this cigar, obviously. To finish 13 out of 25 on the consensus means that there were some other people that were with me on it. Interestingly, not the cheapest cigar. It's $12 to $15. I believe the Torpedo is the most expensive size at $15, but it's certainly a pricier cigar. Not necessarily like unheard of from A.J. Fernandez. Mayimbe certainly rings a bell about very expensive cigars, but for a company that really built its reputation, at least as far as the company, not necessarily as A.J. as a whole, but the company certainly made its reputation on cigars like Last Call and New World, which were more affordable cigars. Excuse me, to see something that starts at 12 and only goes up from there is a bit different. So that is number 13. And there is no number 12, which would mean that there is, in fact, a tie for number 11. And so the first of those two cigars at number 11 is the My Father La Opulencia, which came out last year. And it uses a Mexican Rosado Oscuro wrapper over a Nicaraguan, I think 2 Nicaraguan binders, if I'm not mistaken, and then some Nicaraguan fillers. It's got a very wide price range. The small size, which I think is actually the one that we reviewed at Half Wheel last year, starts at $7.10 or something, and the big size goes all the way up to $12.50. I think it's actually a little bit over $12.50. So here's a case of a cigar that came out in September of 2017, which is a bit old as far as the consensus is concerned. Obviously, the Liga Privada T52 came out in 2009, so that might be a different story. But La Opulencia was a line that's been on the market for a handful of time, and I would guess the reason why it's on here this year is because publications didn't necessarily get to it, and if I had to take a guess, a lot of that was probably due to magazines not being able to get to it, because if the cigar didn't ship till September, but because of the way that magazines work, you obviously have to print them before. It's not like the blogs where you can be updating the consensus post 5 minutes before it goes out. Magazines probably didn't have the opportunity to fully review it, and if I had to take a guess and look through the numbers, my guess would be that the La Opulencia was on here largely as a result of magazines, although there's certainly some blogs, because in order to get anywhere close to the top 10 on the consensus, you got to have numerous different sources give you points to make it on here. And so, once again, tied for 11th place, the My Father La Opulencia. And the other 11th place cigar is the Davidoff Diademas Finis 50 year, and that is, in fact, from Davidoff, made at the Davidoff factory. It is a tribute or a recreation, a re-release, whatever you want to call it, of the original Diademus Finis, which came out to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Zeno Davidoff, the company's founder. And the Diademus Finis was always sort of one of these legendary non-Cuban Davidoff sizes, perhaps the legendary non-Cuban Davidoff. And it originally came out unbanded in these very simplistic cardboard boxes, although like pretty cardboard boxes. They had these collage on them of Zeno Davidoff's life and his childhood, his parents who actually founded the tobacco shop that became Davidoff, that became this brand that's synonymous with cigars worldwide. And the Diademus Finis was a limited edition cigar. And then as part of the 50th anniversary celebrations, Davidoff brought it back. But not only did that, they brought the size back. I would say this is a tribute to the original one. The blend is not the same as far as we can tell. And I think Davidoff even acknowledged that the blend isn't the same. For those wondering about that blend, it's an Ecuadorian Habano wrapper with a Dominican Olor binder and some Dominican fillers, including some stuff as old as 2005. And then they packaged them in these beautiful white ceramic jars with a real wooden lid, and the packaging was fantastic. It was on our packaging awards. Certainly one of the more impressive, from a company that does really, really good cigars at really expensive prices and really, really good packaging to go along with that. The Davidoff Diademus Finis was a notable release. I believe it's the most expensive cigar on here. As I look down, yeah, it is. At $36, it's the most expensive cigar. Tied for 11th place. Was a cigar that also made the Half-Wheel's top 25. Made numerous people's lists. I know the guys over at Developing Palates, multiple of those people had it as their top cigar. So, anytime you make it, like I said, in the top 10-ish of this list, you got to have a lot of votes from a lot of different places, and Davidoff certainly managed to do that. Number 10 is Beer Time. Brooks, have you had this beer before? Did you find that it got less sweet as it warmed up? Okay, Brooks agrees with me, but he's also been sick, so who knows if he can taste anything. No, I like it. I certainly wouldn't stand in line for it. I might stand at like a register for it, but not in line. Beer-wise? I'd stand in line for Westy 12. Sticky Monkey. I'm sure there's like 17,000 Jay Wakefield collaborations that I would stand in line for. All right. For those of you wondering, I am not a craft beer expert, but we do have a beer website, which I don't write for. It's called tenemu.com. You can check it out. Patrick would really appreciate it if you did, as would I. But for now, we're going to get to the top 10 of the Consensus 2018. And coming in at number 10 is the Mombacho Cosecha 2013 from Mombacho Cigars S.A. in Granada, Nicaragua. It is made at their Casa Favili factory in Granada. If you ever get the opportunity to go to Nicaragua and you're not down there for like straight up cigar tourism, but you have the opportunity to go around and see some things, I would highly recommend checking out the factory. Be aware Granada can be a bit hot, but it is a beautiful colonial city. And this isn't a tour or a travel website, so perhaps we'll talk about the cigar. It's a Nicaraguan Puro. It is, I believe, the second most expensive cigar on this list at $21.95. It's also one of the more limited cigars at 800 boxes of 10 cigars. I believe that means the Warped is the only thing. The Moon Garden is probably the only thing so far that we've gone over that's more limited than this. But Mombacho Cosecha 2013, these are made, Cosecha means harvest, and 2013 is obviously a date. It refers to the harvest, so it's a cigar made entirely of tobacco from the 2013 harvest. Excuse me, Mombacho started this series, I believe, last year with the Cosecha 2012. They've been putting away tobacco every year to keep these things going, which means you will see in 2019, if all goes to plan, a Mombacho Cosecha 2014. Brooks has turned around at me and is looking at me. Oh, apparently you guys are seeing the flash? Oh, yeah, because there's glass behind me. All right, so we're going to turn that off in case you had a seizure. I apologize. Robert Minato is in the comment section. He can give you some advice about Tegretol dosage. So the Mombacho Cosecha 2013 once again, single size, only made with tobacco from the 2013 harvest. Nicaraguan Puro, second most expensive cigar, second most limited cigar on the list. And I would say Mombacho is another case of a company where I wonder what would have happened with them. And we'll see next year. They released a cigar called Casa Favili, which is named after their factory. Late this year, it's soft launched, very limited production, went to a handful of stores. The cigar is now going to come out in full production, I believe, this month. Maybe not this month, but shortly. And it showed up on a few people's lists, but most people didn't have the opportunity to smoke it. I think, got some show samples. I have not smoked the cigar yet, to my knowledge. And I'm curious to know what would have happened. It's an interesting cigar. It's got some broadleaf tobaccos that were actually grown in Nicaragua, which is not something you see every day. And certainly given cigar media's love of both broadleaf tobacco and Nicaragua, I'm certainly curious to see how that cigar ends up on the list next year. So number 9 is the Wise Man Maduro. And it is the second consecutive year that the Wise Man Maduro has made it onto this list. I think I mentioned this earlier, but the Wise Man Maduro finished as the top cigar on the consensus in 2017. So certainly, it is more. It's interesting to see it back on the list in the top 10. I don't know. I would venture to guess that this is the case. Although maybe Sober Mesa did this, but to have the cigar end up in the top 10 2 consecutive years in a row is certainly a notable accomplishment. And there's not much you can say about a cigar that ends up on the consensus 2 years in a row in the top 10, other than it's obviously very popular with cigar media. Unlike some other cigars that have won this award, Nicolas Mello decided to, and I don't think it's related to this, but there was an extension to the Wise Man Maduro this year. They released a limited edition Lancero as an extension to the Wise Man Maduro. So it wasn't like he released the line in 2017 and then just completely ignored it for 2018. But obviously, I think the focus for Foundation this year was on that new Tabernacle that was number 18 on the list. For those wondering about this blend, it is made at TAPSA using a Mexican San Andreas Maduro wrapper, a Nicaraguan binder, and fillers from Honduras and Nicaragua, or just Nicaragua? Not entirely sure, because it got cut off on our list here. But that is the Wise Man Maduro from Foundation Cigar Company, the number 9 cigar on the consensus. And we will go right into the number 8 cigar, and that is the Crown Heads Court Reserve 13 from Crown Heads, the first cigar from the company to be nationally released with the word Crown Heads on it. Made at Tabacalera La Alianza Eseada in the Dominican Republic. It uses a Mexican San Andreas wrapper over an Ecuadorian binder and fillers from Nicaragua. It's offered in 3 sizes, priced between $9.50 and $12.50. It is a limited release cigar, limited to 150,000 total cigars, although we don't know what the exact splits are on between the 3 sizes. Here's another cigar that made it onto this list. It wasn't released that late in the year. It was released in October. Although Halfwheel, for whatever reason, sort of slacking off here. We actually haven't reviewed it yet. It's on the review schedule, though, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think I'm reviewing it, but it is on the review schedule, so it will be reviewed shortly here. But another cigar from Crown Heads on the consensus in the top 10. Not a surprise. The brand has historically done extremely well on these lists over the years. And oh, 18. Sorry. I thought I misspelled something. But no, I said 13. It's obviously 18 for 2018. Thank you, Patrick, for pointing that out. Yeah. I've smoked one, thought it was a good cigar, but I don't think are here to listen to my thoughts about other people's top 25 list, although that's exactly what we're doing today. So, number 7 is the Warped Serie Grand Reserve of 1988 from Warped Cigars. Also, the first cigar, I believe, from Warped to ever include, well, I guess the first cigar from Warped in sort of Warped 2.0 era to ever include the Warped name. I'm not entirely sure about the original Warp stuff, like the old school El Teton de Bronze, pre-La Colmena, pre-El Oso stuff. If you were a fan, if you were on Cigar Pass or Puff.com or BOTL back in the day, you know what I'm talking about. But for those wondering, Warped was Warped. The Warp that you know today is a lot different than the original Warp that Kyle came out with many years ago. It was largely sold on forums. I'm not even sure it was actually sold in stores, but he had a few lines, and they were largely talked about on cigar forums, and they sort of very rarely ever left that. And then Kyle disappeared for a few years and came back with what I would say Warped 2.0, which is the Warped that you see today, and the Warped that managed to get this cigar, another single-size line on the list. It is made at the Tabacos Valle de Jalapa Eseada factory in Esteli, which is the Aganorsa associated factory, Aganorsa-owned factory. It's a Nicaraguan Puro offered in a single size, priced at $9. This was a cigar that was heavily delayed, but finally came out late this summer. I believe it was expected to come out in 2017, but never did. And I know Kyle went on Reddit and kind of talked about why the cigar wasn't released when he said it was going to be, and basically said, look, I'm not going to rush cigars that I don't think are ready. There are things out of my control. It's not unique to Kyle, and I think he was certainly, frustrated, not just with the process, but frustrated that he was getting signaled out for something being delayed. We certainly point out when cigars are being delayed because it's a worthwhile thing to point out. Certain brands are really good about putting cigars out on time. You can say whatever you want about Rocky Patel, but one thing, and retailers around the country will know this, when Rocky Patel says a cigar is coming out for the first time after the trade show in August, it ships in August. He is and his company is very good about making sure that they will not announce things until they are 100% ready and until they know the cigars can come out. There are other brands that struggle with that concept, and and ultimately, I think every cigar company, whether you're Rocky or whether you're Warped or the other brands that struggle with getting stuff out on time, you're always faced with the decision of, sometimes the cigars just aren't ready. It's a 100% handmade product. You can't. It's not like alcohol or other things. You can't stick it in the you can stick it in the microwave, but most of our manufacturers haven't considered sticking the cigars in the microwave. There's not really things you can do. It's at certain points to rush the process. It's either going to be ready or it's not going to be ready. And so Kyle certainly gave a post. I know it's in our review if you go to it and you can look at it, and he talks about how he had some struggles with that process. I thought for a second we were going to get the UPS guy to have a cameo here, but he's not. He went and dropped that off with Brooks. Number 6 on this list is the La Flor de Inclán from Villiger, which is another cigar made in the Dominican Republic. One of, I believe, only 2. Maybe I shouldn't have given that away. If you're a Dominican cigar manufacturer and you're hoping to see yourself on the consensus and you haven't been here yet, you can, I guess, close out. But anyway, the La Flor de Inclán is another of these sort of newer Villiger cigars, not entirely new. They had new sizes this year, if I'm not mistaken. It is made at A-Bomb Cigars or A Bomb Cigar. I have no clue. I don't know what the Spanish pronunciation of that is. ABAM Cigars SRL in the Dominican Republic. It uses an Ecuadorian wrapper over an Indonesian binder and a Dominican and Nicaraguan filler. There's this torpedo size. There's a Churchill size, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Lancero size. Maybe not the Churchill. I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to get a whole bunch of corrections, including about how to pronounce that factory name from Patrick shortly. But another cigar from Villiger, the second one on this list, and I feel confident in saying the the highest Villiger top 25 consensus cigar that we've seen so far. Anytime you're making it on the top 10, as I mentioned before, it's got to be a variety of points that you're gathering from different sources, whether it be magazines or blogs or YouTubers or radio shows, whatever we're operating with this year. And the Inclán certainly managed to get that. And I think it's worth pointing out that Villiger, more so than most any other company, makes specific efforts to reach out to media. They make, I don't have one that I can grab handy, but they make media kits that include samplers of the cigars. They have one of each vitola, and they're made for it. Villiger and their media agency has been known to send out bottles of liquor late in the year or early in the year, which certainly can't hurt. And more so than anything else, as I mentioned at the beginning of this list, this is, or as I mentioned every year, I guess, with this list, this is certainly a great interpretation, a great way to see inside the into the relationship between cigar media and cigar manufacturers. And Villiger has, a couple years ago, I noted that they were on this list largely because, and almost or exclusively because of how they had done with magazines and top 25 lists, and that was probably not unrelated to the fact that they were spending money with magazines. They have since, I don't know if they're spending money with online sources, I believe they are as well, but they've since spent quite a bit of money, not necessarily in advertising, but in media relations, and they certainly are much more accessible than Villiger was prior to this sort of new regime at Villiger Cigars North America, and it pays off. It's very challenging for brands, and if you look up and down this list each and every year, brands that don't talk to media or don't talk to certain types of media, generally speaking, don't end up on these lists, because that means that you're less likely to get reviewed. And really, if you don't get reviewed, you're probably not going to end up on a top 10, top 25 list. And there are certain brands that just have very bad overall relationships with online cigar media. And given that online cigar media still makes up the biggest chunk of voting for this list, if you don't do well with online cigar media, you probably aren't going to do well with the consensus. Not that that is the most important thing here. Obviously, make good cigars, and hopefully you'll be rewarded for them, but it's not always the case. Number 5, to speak of that entire conversation about the importance of having good relationships with media, is the Aganorsa Leaf signature selection from Aganorsa Leaf. And this is a Nicaraguan Puro with a Corojo 99 Jalapa wrapper provided by Aganorsa, obviously. A Nicaraguan binder and Nicaraguan fillers from Esteli and Jalapa. And the reason why I say that it's important to note that, or it's important to have good relationships, and why this is a great cigar to talk about that. This is a cigar that came out this year from the brand formerly known as Casa Fernandez, which had some luck, certainly wasn't completely ignored, but taps of the factory always did well, but largely because of what Illusione and Warped and HVC and some others did. But Aganorsa itself and Casa Fernandez never really did that well in these lists. This year they rebrand themselves. They hire Terrence Riley, formerly with Quesada, who I think it's safe to say is, if you had to look at individual people in this business and had to look at their overall relationships with media, both online and offline, or not online, but online and print, Terrence Riley has great relationships, I would venture to guess, with a lot of the bloggers. Quesada certainly, through its own efforts, through Pro Cigar, certainly had a lot of relationships with bloggers and print media, people alike. Terrence is well liked. He's a nice person, which is always helpful. And not to say that anyone at Casa Fernandez wasn't that, whether it would be Paul Palmer or Max or even Eduardo, but those people just don't have, I would once again venture to guess, don't have relationships at all with a lot of the online media people and probably with some of the print people. And so Terrence comes on board, and I feel confident in saying that there's probably been no product in Casa Fernandez's history that has been reviewed as much as this one has in the Aganorsa Leaf, with maybe the exception of the Guardian of the Farm stuff, but that was a collaboration with Warped, and we can get into collaborations and all that stuff. But with stuff that Warped was not involved with, I feel confident saying that this is the cigar that has been reviewed more. And once again, in order to end up on these lists, you need to be reviewed. And so if you are reviewed, you can end up here. It is a good cigar. I haven't smoked all 4 Vitolas. It is a limited edition cigar, but a good cigar nonetheless, and a top 5 finish, which is, once again, Casa Fernandez has never, or Aganorsa Leaf / Casa Fernandez have never been this high up on the list. And I have to imagine that Terrence Riley was extremely helpful in that. So we're going to try to close this out pretty quickly. Number 4 is the Cornelius and Anthony the Gent. And if you're wondering, I didn't have to redo this slide because this is the exact place that it finished on Halfwheel's Top 25. I will try to be very quick with my thoughts because I said them before, and I know it's hitting that 5 o'clock East Coast time. This is made at Lazona Cigar Factory in Esteli. It uses an Ecuadorian wrapper over an American binder and Honduran and Nicaraguan fillers. I find this cigar to be, I love this cigar. I reviewed it very highly. I said it was an absolute joy to smoke. I even smoked the 6x60 and reviewed the 6x60, which probably is not my favorite size to smoke. But, the cigar smoked, the blend smoked extremely well in that size. This is a cigar that's very interesting to me because Cornelius and Anthony, the brand, was very much focused on their other cigar at the trade show, which is called the Mistress, and yet the cigar that ends up on The consensus in terms of the top 25 is the Gent. The Mistress got a few votes, but was not close to certainly this place. And yeah, it seemed like despite all the talk at the trade show about the Mistress, the other cigar is the one that gets rewarded, and if at least as far as I am concerned, the better of the two cigars ends up on this list, which is always nice to see. Speaking of cigars and the trade show and talking about them, number 3 cigar is the Southern Draw Cedrus the Hogan. This is from Southern Draw. It is a cigar that is meant as a tribute to one of the more important people and more important families to Southern Draw's creation. It uses an Indonesian binder over an Indonesian wrapper over a Nicaraguan binder and fillers from the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua. And it is once again made at A.J. Fernandez Cigar Factory in Esteli. This is a cigar from Southern Draw, which has done extremely well in the last couple years on this list, and I think that coincides with Southern Draw's overall performance in the cigar market. They're doing better. There's no question about that, and they certainly, as far as small brands are concerned, or smaller brands are concerned, they certainly have grown quite a bit and have done it in a sort of stable manner, I would say. And also, interestingly enough, in a manner that involves not only brick-and-mortar retailers, but a lot of the big catalog retailers, where Southern Draw seems to be working with them, which is not always the case. And, you know, it certainly is something that requires a bit more hands-on approach, particularly to make sure that you don't lose sight of the brick-and-mortars and you don't destroy those relationships as soon as you go over the catalogs. And Southern Draw seems to be handling that very well. This is a cigar that was at the trade show. There was a big media event centered around the cigar. I did not attend it, so I don't know how big it was, but the Southern Draw booth was crowded. I can only imagine what it looked like during that event. I know from talking to other media people, they were there, and I can't imagine that hurt the cigar's performance and its ability to end up at the number 3 spot on the consensus. And so that leads to the top 2. It was pretty close between the numbers 1 and 2 this year. I would imagine if you find out what the number 2 cigar is, you probably know what the number 1 cigar is, and vice versa. But I'm going to start with the number 2 cigar, and that is none other, although I guess it's not on the screen right now. It's Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust Sin Compromiso. Steve Saka has once again gotten very close to winning the consensus, but still hasn't crossed that line. I think. Did Sober Mesa not win it? Huh. I seem to recall. I'm sure Patrick will tell me quickly. I'm like 90% sure that Steve Saka has not won the consensus, but maybe he has. I know that Sober Mesa and Mi Querida have gotten very close, although Mi Querida, yeah, and Todos Los Dias as well. But Patrick will double check that for me, but I'm pretty sure that he's like finished in twice now, like 2 or 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. But Sin Compromiso, made at Hoya de Nicaragua. It's the cigar. The name is Without Compromise. It is basically Steve Saka's cigar of what happens if money and time, which it certainly took some time to make it, and what happens if none of that matters. And you just make the best cigar that you can, the way that you want to make it, and that is Sin Compromiso. It's got a Mexican San Andreas wrapper on it. Steve Saka explained that one of the reasons why this cigar was delayed was because of the process to get this wrapper. An Ecuadorian Habano binder and fillers from Nicaragua. It's priced at $15.95 to about $18.50 per cigar, so certainly not one of the more affordable options on this list. And yeah, it's number 2. It's a very good cigar. I wish that it was a bit cheaper so I could smoke more of them on a regular basis. And yeah, that's number 2. Sorry, there's some text messages trying to figure out if Halfwheel is going to have a new office next year coming in. But that's less important than what's about to come up. And so that would be the number 1 cigar on the consensus this year. And it is none other than the Hoya de Nicaragua's Cinco Décadas from Hoya de Nicaragua, made at their Nicaraguan factory. They have not disclosed the actual blend of the cigar, so I can't tell you that. It is priced at $18.99 or $19.99, depending on which of the 2 sizes you pick. For those wondering, the Diademas size certainly was the more popular as far as both the number of votes and where those votes were coming in than the El General size, which is like a Churchill. And Patrick is confirming the other fact about Steve Saka, but we'll get to that in a second. So, yeah, Hoya de Nicaragua, it was the factory got both 1 and 2, which is highly impressive. I believe the first time that's happened. It's not the first time they've won the consensus. They, in fact, won the inaugural consensus. I believe it was that. I'm trying to think back here. No, they won the 2012 consensus with Cuenca y Blanco, which at the time I think was it known as CYB back then? I forget. But Cuenca y Blanco definitely won the consensus. Patrick has got to be really happy with the amount of fact checking he is doing on the fly here. And yeah, if you were reading top 25 list, you obviously saw there were 2 cigars that were showing up on just about every one of them. The gap between the top 2 was pretty small. It was basically like a top 20, like a number 1 and a number 10 for Sin Compromiso would have put it over the top. But the gap between 2 and 3 was pretty wide. And yeah, it certainly is a banner year for Hoyt and Nicaragua. Their 50th year in business, and they made a cigar that cigar media talked about, liked a lot, reviewed well, and finished very well on the top 25. All right, so a couple last things. I'm going to take my face off the screen. We're going to go through some things really quick, and then I'm going to get to some questions, and then I'm going to get back to work because that's a problem. So top country, and this is not exactly the most competitive of awards, but it once again is Nicaragua. That should be of no surprise. For those wondering about what the breakdown looks like, it is on your screen. Nicaragua with well over half, almost 2/3 of the total votes, the Dominican Republic in second, and Honduras in third with a pretty wide gap. Cuba sort of fell off here, interestingly finishing behind Costa Rica. I know M. Bombay was obviously in the top 25 with the M. Bombay Classic Torpedo. I also mentioned that MQBA wasn't that far away from making the list. Atabey and Byron also had some cigars on here that helped it, and Cuba just didn't do particularly well. There are certainly a couple publications that reward Cuba a lot more than others, but what it needs for Cuba to make the list, until things change with how media publications are working, is there's a couple of them, including us and Stogie Guys and a couple other blogs, that sometimes will put Cuban cigars in their top 25 because they review them, and sometimes they don't. And this year, Cuba unfortunately just didn't have enough points, or fortunately, depending on I guess how you're looking at it. But certainly, while it was finishing better over the last couple of years, a noticeable fall off this year. So that is that. Top factory should come of absolutely no surprise, considering they had both the number 1 and number 2 consensus cigar of the year, and that is Hoya de Nicaragua. And for those of you that are wondering about the other top 5 factories, the data breaks down like this. Fun fact, the beer is not really helping my throat, but yeah, and so what's interesting about this is 4 of those 5 factories are in Esteli, which is Nicaragua, and those top 4 factories combined for 36.6% of the total vote, or the total points that were allotted to cigars on the consensus, and 10 out of the top 15 cigar factories were in Nicaragua. There is a category on the spreadsheet that you can see once we put it up that says NA, that includes factories that aren't listed. That finished within the top 15, but if you remove that one because it's a diversity of factories, then you end up with these 5. So, top brand is actually extremely interesting and was quite close, but it is Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. And I say that because Hoya de Nicaragua, which finished in second here, placed both the obviously the Cinco de Cadas, not the Cuatro Cinco, but the Cinco de Cadas, and also the Hoya Silver on the top 25 list. Steve Saka also had 2 cigars on there. There were other cigars like Todos Las Dias from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. There were other cigars from Hoya de Nicaragua like the Antaños and the Antaño Reservas or Grand Reservas. But Saka managed to edge out his manufacturing partner just slightly, and that is not supposed to say factories. It's supposed to say brands, but so we're just going to ignore that right there. You can't, I guess, the factory's part of it. And you'll see that it's Hoya de Nicaragua finished a pretty close second. Tayawahe gets back in the top 3 after falling outside of the top 10, and then Davidoff and Drew Estate round out the top 5. And if you're wondering about all this data, it will all be put up once the consensus post goes out, which may or may not happen after I take a nap because it's been a long week-ish of award season. But we're not done yet because we got some questions, so if you have any last-minute questions, I suggest that you get them in here. Get them in here quickly because Yeah. For those wondering, if we're doing like an around the horn style of fact check, PTI, which one doesn't? One of the ESPN shows. Saka has still not won the consensus, but he has finished in third twice with Todos Los Dias in 2017 and Sobremesa in 2016, and this is his third second place finish after both Mi Querida in 16 and Sobremesa in 2015. So, yeah. There's that. And I just closed out the questions. All right, let's get to them. How is this process for curating the YouTube data versus website data? It's the same process, other than unfortunately some of the YouTubers don't like put description or put their, like, I understand it, you want people to click on your video, but I had to watch a lot of YouTube videos and had to like, yeah, I mean, I had to watch a lot of YouTube videos versus normally speaking with everyone else, it's pretty easy. You just go on the website and you find the data. But in terms of like, it wasn't like YouTubers were given 10 points and magazines were given 25, and no, they were all given 25. I will say this, it seemed like there was a popular pipe YouTuber, I don't know who it is, but I learned a lot about pipe YouTubing, who asked his fellow pipe YouTube content creators to create their top cigar lists, and so a lot of them did that, and I watched a lot of them, and then I also found out that most of them weren't reviewing cigars in throughout the year, so they didn't make it on the list because one of the qualifications to make it on this list is you need to be a regular cigar reviewer, and so as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't make sense to put somebody's top 10 cigars on the list, on the year list, unless they aren't a cigar reviewer, or if they aren't a cigar reviewer, because like, why would you, I mean, if Half Wheel put out a top 10 wine list, like, I'm sure some of you would click on it, but we aren't exactly pretty authoritative about wine just because we occasionally drink it, and sometimes in excess. This provides validity for sites to review cigars from IPCPR to IPCPR rather than IPCPR to the rest of the end of the year, where some 2018 releases would get cut off, I guess. But so the argument, it's not really a question, but John McTavish writes that, who is a cigar blogger, writes that this provides validity, which I assume means the consensus provides validity for sites to review cigars from IPCPR, so basically July to July rather than July to the end of December, because releases get cut off, but which I guess is true. Look, I think that there aren't that many blogs, magazines that are left that only review cigars that came out in 2000, fill in the blank. We certainly were in that category at one point, but the reality is there are too many cigars that come out in any given year to review them. And the other problem is that there are too many delays, and then you're seeing things like with the Casa Favilli, and you've seen it with other cigars, or the Liga Rivada 10 Aniversario, where only a small fraction of retailers get a very small amount of cigars. They sell out quickly, and then, and then a larger shipment comes in much later. And so, like, okay, it came out in 2018, but only if you were these 5 retailers, and only if you happen to be in the shop that day. Otherwise, you didn't get a chance to smoke it. But we're not gonna count it when it comes out for like reels in 2019. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think that there aren't too many sites that have that stringent qualifications at this point. I would say that Half Wheel was certainly one of the more stringent, if not the most stringent, at one point or another, and we have since abandoned that because it's just the reality of the markets. And I would love to be OCD about this and have very rigid rules, but it doesn't make sense in terms of the quality of the product that we're trying to give consumers. How long does it take to generate the consensus? Less time than it used to. I don't know. A while. It took less time, like I said, than it used to. It's helpful because I have a long list now of sites, so I have a good starting point, and I add sites to my RSS reader throughout the year as I see them, and I favorite list on Twitter, and every once in a while I'll go into YouTube and try to see if there are any more YouTubers. There are a couple new YouTubers that are on our list this year. Yeah. Less time than it used to is the answer. I don't know. It's probably less than 25 hours. Is it a site project or just a Charlie project? It is mainly a Charlie project, but it is not just a Charlie project. There are at least 2 other people that make this go a lot easier, and it would be not impossible, but certainly a lot more challenging to do this. So Brooks Whittington takes all of our photographs, or the vast majority of our studio photographs, and he edits all of them. And so if we didn't have Brooks, then the photographs would be a lot worse than what you see on the website or what you saw on your screen earlier. And he and Patrick Lurie, who is the other big help to this, also pay attention and will kind of let me know when lists are there. Patrick does a whole bits of odds and ends, including earlier today he was fixing a logo for me in Photoshop because I didn't have time to do it. He obviously monitors the comment sections for this thing. He'll proofread the article. He'll point out when things aren't working, when links are broken, and there's probably countless other things that he does. But in terms of putting together the spreadsheet and all the number crunching and the analysis, and the vast majority of it is me, and I'm tired. All right. So on that note, I think I'm going to call it quits on that. I do have to check on one thing because this is not the last time that I will be on camera today for some reason. I don't know why I agreed to do this, but I will be on the Developing Palettes show later today or tonight. I don't know when it is. I do know I will be back here because it's like 35 degrees outside right now and windy, so I will not be outside. So anyway, it will be the guys from Developing Palettes. I'm not sure if all 4 of them are on, but yeah. And then William Cooper from Cigar Coop and myself, we will be on their Cigar Media 2018 recap. And it starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You can see it. Go to their site, developingpalettes.com, and watch it. There's a whole list of topics somewhere. I think I may have thrown them on the ground at some point. I printed them out, though, of things that we'll be going over, including the consensus, half-wheels lists, Cigar Coop's list, Developing Palettes 4 lists. That was a lot of fun. If you're wondering who the most time-consuming singular media publication to put into the list was, Developing Palettes with 4 lists. So we'll be talking about all that stuff, as well as some other 2018 trends, predictions for 2019. I don't know what else, but I'll be back here. So you can check out that at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific on developingpalettes.com's website. Yeah, and thank you to Brooks. Thank you to Patrick. Thank you to Treehouse. Not your best beer, but not bad. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. Hopefully, I don't know exactly what happened today. It was exactly the same equipment. We didn't even move the camera, didn't change the settings, but they didn't want to cooperate with us for the bit. So hopefully by the time IPCPR rolls around, we will have a new, better video-looking place, and hopefully we'll have figured out how to use this equipment. Until then, you can check out halfwheel.com. The consensus will probably be up in the next 20-ish minutes. There's some things that need to get fixed, and things that need to be proofread, and things that need to be written. But until then, you can check out halfwheel.com for everything related to cigars and more. And yeah, and I'm Charlie Minato, and I'm going to go